All right, students, now we're going to talk about converting recipes. This is going to look very complicated, but the example that I show you is going to be more than any other example you'll need to know, and you won't be asked to do this example again. You'll only be asked to do simplified conversions. All right, so we talked a little bit about converting recipes. Here's a quick cartoon for you looking at what do we need to do when we're converting recipes. So in this comic strip, it says it serves 8 people. Okay, we're going to have twice that many, so let's double. Okay, so we've got double, 2 pounds of burger. Wow, that's easy. Of course, there's nothing to cooking. It's all math, right? Men are naturally superior in terms of math skills. And then the last thing it says to do is bake 30 minutes at 350. So he says that comes out to 1 hour at 700, if it was that easy, right? So there's a couple things you need to know about converting recipes. We call it changing recipe yield. So the desired yield is how much you want to make. Either you're going to be increasing or decreasing the total amount. This also impacts the total cost. Quality should never vary. Whether you're making 5 or 500, it still should have the same quality. Equipment could change. If you're going from a 8x8 pan and you're doubling it, you're probably going to need a 9x13 pan. Cooking time may need adjustment. So if you're cooking a small batch, so an 8x8 pan, you may need to adjust the time to cook it just a little bit longer if you're using a bigger pan. Temperature should not change. So if it's 350 for an hour, it should be 350. Keep the temperature the same. So there is a complicated formula for changing recipe yields. You take the desired servings you want, so how many you want, which we call it the desired yield, and we divide it by the original yield, which is how many servings the recipe currently makes. And then you get a conversion factor. Then you multiply each ingredient by the conversion factor. You may need to change some things into equivalents to simplify, and I'll show you. And then you convert the answers to logical, measurable amounts. Remember, we don't have a 1/6 cup. We don't have a 1/8 teaspoon. We don't have a 1/2 tablespoon. So you need to convert your answers into terms and tools that we have in a standard kitchen. And then the last part is to adjust equipment and time as needed. So here's a big example. Like I said, this is pretty complicated. The original recipe made 8 servings. We want to make 20. Okay, like I said, this is a very complicated conversion factor. We're not going to ask you to multiply by 2.5 or 3.5. We're just going to ask you to either double or cut recipes in half. But it's important that you understand how this is done. So what you see here is the original recipe, and then changing the conversion, or changing it by having the conversion factor. So the original recipe called for 1 cup. We're going to multiply that by 2.5, which gives us 2.5 cups. Now, as you notice, some of this gets a little more complicated. So 2 teaspoons times 2.5 does equal 5 teaspoons. But we don't want to measure 5 times. We want to measure the least amount of times. So the actual correct answer here would be 1 tablespoon and 2 teaspoons. Baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon, which is, think about $0.25, 0.25 times 2.5, and we get this number, 0.625. So how do we convert that? Well, thinking about this is a little bit more than a half, right? We don't have an eighth, so we're going to say it's about a 1/2 teaspoon and a dash, essentially. So sugar, instead of doing 1 tablespoon, 2 teaspoons, blah, 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 I converted it all to teaspoons. Remember, 3 teaspoons in each tablespoon gets you 5 teaspoons. Again, trying to work as with as even numbers as possible. So this is the big example. Now the one thing with eggs, so how do we divide an egg in half? Well, the process is pretty simple. So if you have a recipe such as this, where you're cutting an egg in half, you have to think about each egg is about 4 tablespoons or 2 ounces. So how do you cut that in half? You'd crack the egg into a bowl, you'd whisk it up until it's all incorporated, and then you'd pull out the 2 tablespoons if you're cutting it in half, or you'd add 2 tablespoons if you're doubling it, or timesing it times 0.5. So that's why we see this. It's 2 eggs and 2 tablespoons, or if you're using a liquid egg mixture, you would use a half a cup plus 2 tablespoons. Vegetable oil. Liquid ingredients, remember, we can convert to ounces, so that's pretty simple. We got 2 ounces times 2.5 equals 5 ounces. You just find the 5 ounce mark on your cup, and that's where you go. So that is the big example. So we have the desired servings we want. We wanted 20. Original was 8. So we took 20 divided by 8, which gave us 2.5, which is the conversion factor. And then we multiplied each ingredient by the conversion factor. Then we converted it to logical, measurable amounts. Do we need to adjust any equipment or time as needed? No, if this is making pancakes, it's just going to take us a little longer to make pancakes. We're still going to preheat the griddle to 350. We're not going to need a bigger pan. We're just going to have to do it several times. So it's helpful that you memorize some of the equivalents, right? What equals a cup? What equals an ounce? So how many teaspoons in a tablespoon? That's why we talked about the importance of measuring. And then the other chart, just to put it into a visual, looking at what are the equivalents. So a lot of times, dash, pinch, blah, blah, blah. When you're looking at that small of an amount, I mean, it's less than 1/4 teaspoon. Exact doesn't really matter, okay? Know the equivalence of a stick of butter, right? 1 stick of butter is a half cup or 8 tablespoons. And then lastly, substitutions. Oftentimes recipes call for fresh herbs, whether it's a tablespoon of fresh basil. Well, just know that 1 tablespoon fresh is equivalent to 1 teaspoon dry. So you use more fresh than you would dry, if that makes sense, because the dry is more concentrated, so you don't need as much. So those are some common substitutions. I hope this helps you. Thank you.